When it comes to the conversation about religion, Carl Jung didn't just pull up a chair. He basically flipped the whole table over. He stepped away from all the dogma, all the theological debates, and he did something radical. He picked up the tools of a physician to examine the human soul itself. So this is our deep dive into his empirical, and for many, revolutionary approach to one of humanity's most profound experiences.
You know the old debate, right? It always seems to get framed as this big conflict. Modern, cold rationalism on one side, and traditional, unwavering faith on the other. But Jung, he proposed a third way. See, he wasn't interested in proving or disproving God. He was fascinated by the undeniable experience of the divine, this powerful feeling that echoes through all of human history.
Now, to really get what Jung was doing, you have to see him not as a philosopher, and definitely not as a theologian, but as a doctor. His clinic was the human psyche. His patients, their dreams, their visions, that was his evidence. His entire method was built on a really simple scientific idea. Facts first, theories later. He was, to his very core, an empiricist. And this quote, right here, this was his guiding light. He wasn't asking, is this doctrine metaphysically true in some far-off heaven? No. He was asking, does this idea, this story, this religious symbol, does it actually correspond to an observable, repeatable pattern inside the human mind? If he could find that psychological foundation, then for him, the doctrine had a profound truth, a truth that had nothing to do with blind faith. So you see, he drew a really clear line in the sand. Theology, that's about the nature of God in himself, which Jung felt was just beyond the reach of science. But psychology, his science, that's about the image of God inside the psyche, that powerful, overwhelming, and very real inner experience that has shaped cultures for thousands of years. He wasn't making statements about God, he was making statements about the soul's encounter with the idea of God. And his main tool for this whole investigation was the archetype. Now, don't think of archetypes as specific inherited memories, like a picture of your great-grandmother. Think of them more like inherited patterns of thought. They're like psychic instincts. They're the universal grammar of the human soul, and you find them everywhere, in myths, dreams, and religions across every single culture throughout history. Okay, so let's really dive into this. How does this concept of a universal, inherited pattern apply to the very heart of religion itself, the idea of God? I mean, think about it. If those overwhelming feelings of awe, of terror, of grace, if they're not coming from some being out there in the cosmos, then where on earth do they come from? Jung's answer was totally revolutionary. He said they erupt from the very structure of our own collective unconscious mind. He proposed that deep down within all of us, there's a primary archetype. He called it the self. This is the archetype of totality, of wholeness. It's like the organizing center of our entire personality, both the parts we know about and the parts we don't. And it's this archetype, when it starts to bubble up into our consciousness, that we experience as God. It's the source of our most profound, most earth-shattering spiritual encounters. But here's the catch. This inner God image, this self, it is not the simple, perfectly good, benevolent figure of leader theology. No way. For Jung, the evidence from dreams and myths pointed to something far more paradoxical, and frankly, a lot more frightening. The God image that emerges from the unconscious is full of conflict. It's a being of light and darkness, creation and destruction, a lot like the complex and often terrifying figure of God in the Old Testament. And this idea, this observation of a paradoxical, morally complicated God image, well, it leads us straight into one of the biggest, thorniest problems in all of theology, the existence of evil. For centuries, a key Christian doctrine was the idea of privatio boni. Basically that evil isn't a real thing, it's just an absence of good, like darkness is just an absence of light. Jung flatly rejected this. From his clinical work, he saw evil not as an absence of anything, but as a powerful, active, and very real force within the human psyche. He called it the shadow. For Jung, to deny the reality of the shadow was just to misunderstand who we are as human beings. It's a huge blind spot. And if the God image is an archetype of psychological wholeness, then it must contain this dark element too. As he points out right there in the texts, Satan wasn't some outside invader. He was originally one of the sons of God, a part of the divine court. So this insistence on the reality of opposites, of good and evil, of light and shadow, this is what led Jung to his most audacious, and for many, his most controversial critique of Christian symbolism.
He thought the Trinity was an incredibly beautiful and powerful symbol, but as a symbol of psychic wholeness, he argued it was flawed. Why? Because by defining itself as pure goodness, the summum bonum, he felt it had basically cut off its own shadow, leaving the whole problem of evil unresolved and just pushed onto humanity.
So let's think about that. If a symbol is supposed to represent the totality of the psyche, what's missing from a picture of pure masculine light? Well, for Jung, the answer was obvious. It's the excluded fourth element. It's the dark, the feminine, the earthly, the body, the irrational. It's the shadow itself.
And this leads to his idea of the quaternity. He felt that a symbol of 3 is always dynamic, always in motion, always a process. But a quaternity, a symbol of 4, represents wholeness, stability, the integration of opposites. You add that 4th missing piece back in, and suddenly you have a much more psychologically complete and honest image of the divine reality that actually lives inside of us.
Okay, so what is the point of all this? Is it just abstract theory? For Jung, absolutely not. All of this pointed directly toward a deeply personal, practical, and truly modern spiritual path, a way for us to actually engage with this inner divine drama. He called this journey individuation. And really, it's the lifelong process of becoming who you are truly meant to be. It's about a courageous conversation between your ego, your conscious self, and that vast, wild, archetypal world of the unconscious. The goal isn't to defeat your unconscious, but to integrate it, to unite the opposites inside yourself and become a whole person. This whole journey, this is nothing less than the conscious realization of the self, of that God image within. It's a kind of incarnation, making that divine, paradoxical wholeness real, right here, in the messy reality of a single human life. It's the modern version of the great spiritual quests of ancient times. So why does all this matter? Well, because it gives modern people a language to understand their own spiritual side without having to throw away their intellect. It validates our inner life, telling us that those experiences are real and deeply meaningful. It also gives us a framework for dealing with our own darkness, not as a sin to be destroyed, but as a vital part of us that needs to be understood. And maybe most importantly, it shifts the goal from a futile chase for perfection to the difficult but actually achievable goal of wholeness. Ultimately, this is where Jung leaves us. He shifts the entire stage from the heavens right down into the human heart. He suggests that the great story of God, of creation and conflict, suffering and redemption, isn't something that just happened once, a long time ago. It is the timeless archetypal story of the soul, and it is unfolding right now inside each and every one of us, just waiting to be lived.